Welcome to Knitting with QueerJoe. Today I wanted to go over a brief tutorial on how to do a fold-over hem specifically on the top of a cuff of a sock. So I'm going to switch right to it. So those of you who have been following along on the blog have seen that I've recently finished one of a pair of socks, and at the top I did what I call a folded hem. A folded hem, or a hung hem, it's sometimes called when you're doing it on a circular sock knitting machine, is basically just a double piece of fabric that gets folded over and hemmed inside, just like a normal pant hem would go. And so what I've done is I've actually gotten up to the same place on this sock as I was on this sock. So you can see that I've done the entire front-facing piece of the fabric, and in fact I started with the I changed the color to the bright gold colorway to show you what comes next. So in order to be able to get the fabric to fold correctly, normally you could actually do a hem where it just rolls over and you can kind of have a rounded edge at the top. I like a little bit of a sharper edge at the top, so I do two things. Usually I change the color so that I can know exactly what I'm doing, and that fold is basically 3 rows of knitting of a particular color in the new color. And so basically what I do is, once I've got the first row of the new color done, which I've already done in this particular example, all I do is for the next row is purl the entire next row. And so the purl row actually creates a kind of a fold over row. Some people, if you've ever done a picot edge at the top of a sock, of a hemmed sock like this, typically you do a knit 2 together and a yarn over at this point, and when you fold it over, that kind of picot edge gets created. So I've got my other color yarn in my way. So basically what I'm going to do is go around this entire round in purl, and I won't put you through that, but I'll go through the entire purling of this row. And you can see how I've got the first row of knit, and then I started the purl row here. And I'll carry that around the entire one. For one round I will do purling. So I've completed the purl round, and now I'm going to create one more round in the yellow color of just plain stockinette, which is just plain knitting. And so the 3 rows of the actual fold over part of the hem is one plain row of plain knitting stockinette stitch, one row of purl stitch, which is the actual fold row or round, and then in this particular case, with my contrasting color, I'm going to do a 3rd row, which is just going to be plain stockinette. That will give kind of a little bit more of a color stripe at the top. It'll give not just the purl row of stripe, but it will give the, on the inside and the outside, it will give 1 row of stockinette in the contrasting color. Now you could do this entire fold over in a single color. If I had just used my main color for those same 3 rows, I'd still get that sharp fold over round with the purl rows, but I actually like the contrasting stripe, and it helped, I think, show it a little bit more. And then the next piece I'm going to do is, after I knit the 1 round of contrasting color, I'm going to knit 10 rows of, or 10 rounds of plain stockinette, and I'll show you what that looks like after I'm done. I like to have a hem of approximately an inch, and so in my case an inch is about 10 or 11 rounds of my knitting. So I'll go ahead and, on my second sock, finish off those additional rounds, and we'll come back to you then. So I've gone ahead and finished the last 10 rounds. So basically what we have is, to make this full 10 by 10 hem, folded over hem. We have 10 rounds of plain stockinette in the main color of the yarn. There's 3 rows of the contrasting color, one in plain stockinette, one in reverse stockinette or a purl stitch, and the third back in a normal plain stitch. And then there's additional 10 stitches before I bind off very loosely. A couple things to note at this point in the process. Make sure you bind off very loosely at the top of any sock, because just like in any sock bind off in a toe-up sock, you want to make sure that that's going to be able to fit over your heel and instep. And in fact, you might want to even try it on if the socks are for you, just to make sure it fits over, because otherwise you're going to have to redo the bind off. And if you've already sewn in this hem, it's going to be kind of a pain to do that. So the easiest way at this point is you can kind of see that the purl bump row creates a natural fold line that creates this, and you can see it in the finished one maybe a little bit better. It's not rounded, it's actually kind of a sharp sort of hemline. And so that's why we put in the purl bump row. It seems to work pretty well for that. And the easiest way to sew this in my experience, is to just turn the sock inside out as much as you need to. And also when you're binding off at the top, after the 10 rows at the top, make sure you leave a long tail, because that's the tail you're going to use to sew up the hem. For me, this is the trickiest part, is sewing in the hem. So when I fold it over, and here's the end of my bind off, I find the 10th row down, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10. So it's going to be about this row right here. And I always find it difficult to track rows on the wrong side of stockinette stitch, but you have to keep it relatively even along that same round of stitches as you're sewing in. Fortunately, this color yarn, this kind of like hand-painted yarn, makes it a little bit easier to track, and so I just do a simple, what they call a whip stitch, into the stitch on the back of the cuff of the sock and on the next cast off stitch, which is this one. Now I made my cast off stitch very loose, like I said, so that it would fit over my heel and instep. Just take a look and make sure. So, and you also want to do this whip stitch pretty loose. So this is the next stitch right there. And at this point, now that I've done 3 of the stitches, or 3 or 4 of the stitches, I just make sure that the fold is naturally falling where it should, and that I did pick the approximate right amount to go down here. This is the next stitch, and so on. And obviously once you finish whip stitching around the entire width of or circumference of the hemline, it will look like this when you're finished. So you can see my slight whip stitches here on that inside hem. And that's what the folded knitted hem on the top of my socks looks like. If you have any questions, feel free to leave comments and questions. I am very responsive to comments on my videos, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions. And thanks again for your participation, and hopefully you'll join me for future Knitting with QueerJoes. Thanks again.